Hello again, everyone, and welcome to The Crusher. I'm your host, Josh Brewster, with my co-host, Susan Olson. Susan, how you doing?
Great, thank you.
All right. Well, today we have a very special guest, Robert Spencer, whose work Susan and I have admired for years. Robert is the director of Jihad Watch. You can find him at jihadwatch.org, and he is a Shulman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. I hosted shows for the Jamie Glazov years ago. Susan was on the Glazov gang when I was the host for David Horowitz. But Robert is the author of 28 books. I want you to read them all today, and I want you to email me. Let me know what you think. The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam. One of my favorites. The Truth About Muhammad, The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS, The Critical Quran, explained from key Islamic commentaries and contemporary historical research. And his forthcoming book is Muhammad, A Critical Biography, which is coming out in September of 2024. And I like the high-tech. Put it back up. I like the high-tech presentation. I love high-tech presentations. Very good. There it is.
Okay.
Well, Robert has...
Yes, nice of them.
Robert has had a very interesting career. He has led seminars on Islam and jihad for the FBI, United States Central Command, United States Army Command. I could go on and on. Terrorism task forces. He's spoken at many dozens of universities. He's appeared on a lot of your favorite shows, ABC, Tucker Carlson, Fox, MSNBC, CNBC, and on and on and on it goes. Bill O'Reilly, Glenn Beck, on and on and on. But Robert is one of the great thinkers of our time. And he's a guy you need to check out right away. So, Robert, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for your enthusiastic and overgenerous introduction.
Well, let me add to that. Just on a personal level, I consider this guy somewhat of a mentor, and also one of the people that ruined my life, because I read Bruce Bauer's book, While Europe Slept, and it got me very interested in Islam.
Yeah.
Yes, and I got started with Robert's books.
Yeah.
And what I love about Robert is he's very, very fair. He is not presenting his opinion. He never does. He presents what is actually happening, the truth about the beliefs of Islam and what's going on, and does it as diplomatically as possible. And when presenting in person, if you have a chance to hear him speak, take that chance, because he does it in a way that's actually even playful. So
yeah. Well,
I adore this man, and we are friends, and I'm so proud of that.
Well, I'll tell you what, Robert has educated a lot of people. He's made a lot of friends, and he's also his delivery of many truths have earned him a lot of hysterical reactions, and we will get some of them quite vicious. We'll get to that. But first of all, Robert, I guess we'll start right here today, and I want to start with this. I want you to fill in the blank for me before we get into dig into all kinds of details. Almost 23 years after 9/11, the Western man blank.
Is stupid. What
Okay.
is title? Is blissfully unaware of what's coming. Is self-deluded. Is full of wishful thinking. How am I doing? Am I getting warmer?
Oh, please continue. I think you're doing great. I think you're doing very well done. Very well done. Thank you, Robert. You're a man after my own heart. Susan, why don't you get us going? Oh, sorry. Well, Susan, why don't you? The clapping ends immediately. Susan, why don't you get us going after that? Because I wanted to start on that. I'm very concerned about what the Western man believes at this point. But why don't you start us off?
I am too, and I just like to say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I think that there was so much concern after 9/11 about not being mean to Muslims that everybody bent over backwards and began to ignore the truth about Islam. And I always make a big distinction between Islam and Muslims, because there are a great many Muslims out there who don't know about Islam. They go through the motions, and I don't have any problems with them. It is the ideology of Islam that really is a political ideology with a religious component. It's not really a religion, and the intention is much more political. And I would say believe them when they say what they're all about, which is world domination. And so it's important to me to have Robert on, because I think he's the best educator about Islam. And I'm seeing this really big divide in people that I really like, the podcasters that I really like, particularly the ones that used to be on the left that have come to common sense. But then when it goes to Israel, it all goes kablooey, because they don't understand the religious component here.
Well, Robert, why don't you go from there with what Susan's describing regarding the political aspect of Islam?
Well, that's actually the part of the whole problem, that you have Fatah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Palestinian Authority, of which Fatah is a component, and in all of them, they speak, whenever they speak about the conflict, they speak in Islamic terms. They quote the Quran, they call the people that are dead on the Palestinian side martyrs in an Islamic context. They explain that the Quran commends them to fight against the Jews, and so on. And yet, even though every last communique from Hamas and the rest of them has Islam totally central to their explanation of the conflict, when you read the State Department and every last Western analyst who ever talks about this conflict and who has ever tried to come up with a solution, from John Kerry on down, they never mention Islam. It does not exist. It's not on the radar whatsoever. And this is a cognitive dissonance on a massive scale, because here you have one side of the entire conflict almost unanimously telling us this is all about Islam. And the first thing Western analysts do is say, oh, no, it isn't. It has nothing to do with Islam. And so one of them is wrong. And I would venture to say we would be much better advised to take the Palestinians seriously and take them at their word and understand that this is a conflict about Islam, rather than the State Department and all these people who are not necessarily as well informed about the conflict as they want us to believe they are. When they're ignoring the words of 50% of the people involved, then it seems like they're not really going to give us any kind of reliable analysis.
Well, Robert,
And we have, I'm sorry, Robert was among the people that were educating our government about Islam after 9/11. And I guess it was during W that 57, I forget how many countries asked our government to please stop referring to Islam in educating anything.
Early in Obama time.
Okay.
I was training people during the Bush administration, and then in the FBI and the military, and then the 57. It was 57 Muslim and South Asian organizations, like Pakistani groups and Indian groups and so on, along with Muslim groups. I mean, they were all really Muslim groups, but some of them are not labeled as such. And they wrote to John Brennan, who was the head of not the head, but in the Department of Homeland Security at the time. This was before he became the head of the CIA. And they demanded that I be fired and that all mention of Islam be removed from counterterror training. This was in October 2011. I had not actually done training. As soon as Obama came in, I think I did one session at a military base after Obama came in, but people stopped asking me. They knew which way the wind was blowing. But then I was officially fired at the time of this letter. Brennan immediately complied, wrote back to them saying, oh yeah, they would take care of all this immediately, and they did. And there's been no mention of Islam from the U.S. government since then.
Yeah, well, we've heard about the nomenclature during the Obama administration of them tossing out terms like jihad and things of this nature. I remember guys like, I remember interviewing Steve Emerson and Frank Gaffney years ago. And this was their work. Your work also was very important. But you touched on something, because I started with the question, the Western man blank, what does he think? And, you know, this idea that the Western man, Robert, cannot, surely they don't mean that they really want to nuke the Jews off the face of the earth. Yeah, well, that's what they say. And you know, look what Hamas did, which is one of Iran's proxies, and God knows whoever else's proxy. What they did on October 7th, and the Western man, Robert, the Western man, just sits here like this can all be negotiated away. I think that, you know, you mentioned they don't want to mention Islam. I really think the Western man thinks that the world can be negotiated into order.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they're not religious themselves. They are secular cosmopolitans, and that's one thing. But they're worse than that, because they don't understand what it means to be religious, and so they've got to deal in the real world where there are religious people. They have no idea how to do that, and they assume that these religious people think about the world and want the same things that they do, think about the world in the same way they do, and want the same things they do, when actually their mindset is quite different. But they've made no effort whatsoever to understand their mindset. The general Beltway secularist, I don't want to get into an argument about religion here. There's different ways to be secular and atheistic and so on, and just as much variety in that as in religious belief itself. But the fact is that your average State Department secular Beltway guy, he assumes that religious people of all kinds, Christians, Muslims, Jews, whatever, Hindus, Buddhists, they're all stupid if they really take that stuff seriously. And that if they're stupid, they can be easily controlled. And so they see the Muslims taking the religion very seriously and acting upon it. And that's the driving force behind the whole Israeli conflict. And they don't take that seriously. They think, well, yeah, some idiots may believe that stuff, but we'll deal with the reasonable people who think more like us. Only there really aren't any. Who are you going to talk to? Mahmoud Abbas? He's just as much of a believing Muslim as the Hamas leadership. And they have no idea what that even means or what the implications of it are.
Well, then why don't you, Susan, I wanted to touch on something
I'm
real
sorry.
quick. No, real quick. You're going to go next. I want you to talk about Europe and assimilation, because that's really important. I want you to ask that, but I just want to touch on this real quickly here, Robert. Robert, tell the audience what the Muslim Brotherhood is. It has been around since roughly 1929. People hear the word, they think it's B'nai B'rith. It's not. What is the Muslim Brotherhood? And then I want to go to Susan.
1928, it was founded. And that's important because it was 4 years after the abolition of the caliphate. The caliph, the khalifa is an Arabic word, means successor. And the caliphate is the state that is the successor of the ideal Islamic state that Muhammad founded. And the khalifa, the caliph, is the successor of Muhammad as the military, political, and spiritual leader of the Muslims. And the idea of the caliphate is an intrinsic part of Islam. And there were always rival caliphates in Islamic history, but there was always a caliphate from the beginning up until 1924. And this is important because it's considered to be part of Islam itself. At least in Sunni Islamic theology, the Shiites actually believe this too, but in a slightly different way. But the Sunnis think that the caliphate calls for the allegiance of all the Muslims worldwide. That it's not that you are French or Spanish or Saudi or Jordanian or any nationality you can name. You are a Muslim, and that supersedes all other loyalties, overrides all other loyalties. So, your first loyalty is to the Ummah, the global Islamic community that is governed by the Caliph. But since 1924, there's been no Caliph. And this is the worst thing. This is like if you ask the average jihadi, he'll say, and don't get too close, but if you ask one, he'll say, this is where our troubles began. 1924 is where the Muslim world was divided up by the colonial powers, and instead of being one ummah, and even though it wasn't really one ummah before that, but this is the idea that it was one community and it was powerful. And it was the caliphate was destroyed, the Muslim community was split up, and it's no longer powerful. So what they want to do is reunite it and restore the caliphate. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded right after the abolition of the caliphate 4 years later in 1928 in order to restore the caliphate. And it is dedicated to working internationally to destroy existing governments, even ones that are Muslim governments, because it wants a universal Muslim government, not a particular one for a particular country, and establish Sharia, Islamic law, and restore the caliphate. This is the whole idea. And every major Muslim organization in the United States is linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas, the group that attacked Israel on October 7th, says that it's a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood for Gaza. So it's all the same movement to bring about Islamic rule. And this is just one reason why it's so foolish of the State Department to completely ignore Islam when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Susan, go ahead.
And when it comes to, if our viewers will recall the Arab Spring, which was an attempt to get the caliphate back,
that was the Muslim Brotherhood uprising. Those were Muslim Brotherhood revolutions in various states, supported by the Obama administration, which was always very pro-Brotherhood. And it was completely misreported in the United States. I remember in those days I was still on Fox a lot, and I was on this panel with, what's that guy's name? Oh, Juan Williams, and all these other people. And every last one of them was saying that, isn't it wonderful that now the Egyptians have democracy, and it's going to take a while for their democracy to be mature, but we have to support them in all this, and all the Arab Spring uprisings. And I said, no, I hate to be the guy to throw the rotting cabbage on the sofa, but this is actually not democracy. This is the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're going to institute Sharia and the caliphate if they can. And Juan Williams said, oh, that's Islamophobic, and everybody said, oh, no, that's not going to happen. Well, who was right?
Well, listen, you can look, Anwar, if you want to know what this is all about, why don't you just go take a look at some pictures of Anwar Sadat being assassinated right after making peace with the Jews.
By the Brotherhood.
By the Brotherhood, of course. It goes on and on. Now, Susan, we talked before we went to air. You mentioned something about Europe and assimilation. And I think when Robert talks about loyalty to a one universal caliphate, Susan, your points, which I'd like you to bring up now, about Europe and assimilation and whether U.S. is headed in the same way.
Okay. Well, in the first place, I believe that there is a collusion between the hard left and Islam, and even the globalists, and they naively believe that they can get the Islamists to do their dirty work. And then, once that's done, then they can get rid of them, kind of like they did in Afghanistan. And as usual, they have no idea how deep the religious passion goes. They have no clue what they're working with. And I like to call it Islamism, which gets a lot of people to call me insane. But there is this collusion, and I don't know how else you would describe what has happened in Europe, which it was very frightening when Hillary was running for president, because they would ask her. She said she wanted to double or triple the number of Islamic refugees coming into America, and she kept saying, when they asked her who would she like to emulate as a leader, she said Merkel, who started the invasion of Europe. So I believe that there are sinister intentions behind this, and it is to throw us into a globalist or communist or whatever ist you want to call it, a different type of government that will take over Western society. There will no longer be the freedoms. So, and what's happening in Europe now is that we're seeing that as the Muslim community grows, the Islamists in the Muslim community get bolder. Robert is currently, I think you're still banned from visiting England, right?
Yeah, and that was just a capitulation to Muslims who were threatening to riot if I showed up. And so instead of saying, well, you're not going to riot because we will preserve law and order, they said, well, we don't want you poor dears to get angry. So they
Well,
banned me. It's often represented, people like to say, oh, see, this guy's so extreme, he was banned from the country. Actually, what they said in the letter that the Home Office sent me was that I was being banned for saying Islam has doctrines of warfare against unbelievers, which is like saying I was being banned for saying water was wet.
well,
Exactly.
Robert, touching on what Susan brought up here, this issue of assimilation. Yeah, we have an open border, and when they asked Kamala Harris about the surge in anti-Semitism, she says, "Oh, well, we're very concerned about Islamophobia." It's like a who's on first thing. I just asked you about anti-Semitism, and you're coming back with Islamophobia. It's like a comedy bit, okay? Like, oh, anti-Semitism? Yes, I'm worried about Islamophobia. Okay, so the border's open. I happen to know that there are people. I met an Afghani the other day who his family or his wife is going over to work for the State Department to bring as many Muslim refugees into this country as possible. Okay, and the border's open, and we seem to have a problem asking anyone to assimilate. And now we see what we have in our streets. So there's a lot right there to unpack, Robert. But let's talk about that open border, mass immigration, um, and your thoughts about what it has done. Has it put the Arab street on our streets?
Well, in the first place, of course, you've got all the people on the terror watch list. I forget the exact number now, but it was over 100 people on the terror watch list over the last year or so who've been caught at the border. And of course, that's just the ones who were caught. We don't know how many got through. And we also know that 19 hijackers on 9/11 were able to kill almost 3,000 people. So if it's another 100 who got through, they could do devastating damage to the United States in the next few years. Then there is the cultural question, and nobody talks about this. Some people talk about people on the terror watch list coming over, and I'm glad of that. But I don't know of anybody else but me who is saying, well, wait a minute, there are also cultural problems. For example, you mentioned this Afghan you were talking to, and there were over 100,000 Afghans brought over to the United States after the fall of Kabul in August 2021. And the Biden regime said that the vast majority of them were actually not the holders of SIVs, which are special immigrant visas. The special immigrant visa is issued or was issued in Afghanistan to people who helped the American military while we were there. So most of the Afghans we've brought over to the United States were not people who helped us in Afghanistan. Most of them were stuck there
Yeah, to be
by the
killed.
Taliban. Yes.
To this day,
But
to
the
this
people
day.
we brought over, we don't know who they are. And the Biden regime has actually admitted this. Alejandro Mayorkas, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, he's admitted this, that we don't know who these people are. And the thing is that there are massive cultural differences between Afghanistan and the United States. And Josh, as you mentioned, because of the multicultural ethos, nobody's talking about assimilation. Nobody is saying these people need to come here and adopt American values. That would be Islamophobic, racist, bigoted, white supremacist, all those things. So nothing's being done to address the fact that you have people coming here who have drastically different values. And what has that meant? Already you have had several of the refugees from Afghanistan involved in rape and child sexual abuse, as well as spousal abuse. So that's three things: rape, child sexual abuse, and spousal abuse. And one guy who had done at least one of those things, maybe more than one, he said, nobody told me any of this was illegal. This is all fine in my country. And this is the problem that nobody wants to face, because here again, it would be Islamophobic to say it, but Afghanistan is governed by Islamic law. And Islamic law allows for the rape of captive infidel women, child sexual abuse because Muhammad married the 6-year-old when he was 51, consummated the marriage, so-called, or raped her when she was 9 and he was 54. And then you have the spousal abuse based on the Quran in chapter 4, verse 34, allowing for the beating of disobedient women. So these are all things this guy from Afghanistan came over here, and he thought he was going to act just the same way, and nobody told him not to. And he ends up getting arrested. He was completely bewildered. And there have been others, and there will be many more.
Well, I want to.
Sweden is the rape capital of Europe because of the immigration.
Sweden's had a problem, right, Robert?
Oh yeah, and you're absolutely right. Stockholm has been called the rape capital of Europe, and they have large numbers of Muslim migrants, and they don't think anything of it because the Quran allows for, as I said, the rape of captive infidel women. Also, it says in chapter 33, verse 50, that's chapter 4, verse 3, 4, verse 24, 23, 1 to 6, and so on. But also in chapter 33, verse 59, it says that women should veil, cover themselves so that they are not molested. So that the unspoken other half of the verse is, the corollary to that is, that if you're not covered, you could be molested. So these guys who have this as kind of a deeply ingrained assumption, they come into Sweden and they see all these women walking around uncovered. They think, well, they're just asking for it. They're fair game.
And for that now, so here's where I want to go with this now. This brings up the issue of what I like to call backflips for Palestine. Don't steal the title. I swear I'll come after you. I'm writing this book. I've been working on it for 24 years, but I've been a little distracted. All right, listen. This brings this up because when you mention all this, I think about all the normal Muslim people I know, okay? And then I think about your book, which I have yet to read, The Palestine Delusion, right? Palestinian Delusion or Palestine Delusion? What is it?
Palestinian Delusion.
Palestinian Delusion. Okay, so that brings up, it's an evocative title, and it brings up in my head this. I hate to break it to America, Donald Trump had the right idea in terms of foreign policy. And his idea was this. All you Middle Eastern countries that cannot accept Israel, here's what we're going to do. So he said to the Palestinians, if you cannot accept Israel's basic right to exist, we have nothing to talk about. I will go and I will seek to make normalcy agreements between any Arab country that will normalize with Israel. Therefore, when we do, we will minimize the virus. We will locate the virus. We will identify the virus of this jihadist madness, and we will isolate it further and further by signing up more Arab countries. So, of course, you had the Abraham Accords, and things were, and normalization was on the horizon. And, of course, people talk about even Saudi Arabia, perhaps their concern about the Iran threat. They were going to perhaps jump into a normalization deal with Israel, which would be a stunning world development on par with anything that's happened in the last century and a half. I'm almost done, I promise. So, here we are, and normalcy is out the window. And to me, Trump was right, and as Netanyahu said in his autobiography, this idea of the Palestinian centrality theory has got to go. If we wait, we will be waiting till the end of time for the Palestinians to change their minds about the Jews and the Jewish state. So you might as well normalize with those who will normalize and will isolate the jihadist virus. Okay, that's my speech, Robert. Now here we are, giving billions to Iran. We're back to the bad old days. What about moderation in the Arab world? What about normalization with Israel? And why has this all come undone?
Well, of course, the Biden administration wanted to undermine the achievement of the Abraham Accords because they came from Trump, and they wanted to undo everything Trump had done. And a lot of the outreach to Iran, I think it only makes sense in light of that as well, that they hated that Trump had repudiated Obama's Iran nuclear deal, as terrible as it was, so they wanted to restore it. And then first the Iranian uprisings got in the way, and then the Hamas attack on Israel got in the way. But of course, they still just recently sent $10 billion to Iran in unfrozen assets, which is basically, it's a criminal act because Hamas is still listed as a terror group by the State Department, as is Hezbollah. Both of them are funded by Iran, which means that now the Biden administration is funding Hamas and Hezbollah. Really, if the Republicans had any sense, which they do not, they would have impeached him for that and tried him for treason, for that matter. But
exactly.
the thing is, the Abraham Accords will always remain alive as a possibility as long as there's an Iran threat, because the countries that joined, like Bahrain, they are deeply threatened by Iran, as is Israel. And so they have every reason to make common cause with Israel against the common threat. And that will continue. So it's very possible, if Trump is indeed reelected, if they don't kill him and allow him to take office, then the Abraham Accords could indeed be revived and expanded.
But Robert, don't you think, looking at the way that the left behaves, I mean, it's easy to say that they're very naive or very stupid, but don't you think they know what they're doing?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, I agree with you that the Left Islamic Alliance is not accidental or a marriage of convenience. It's a deep kinship based on the fact that, in the first place, they're both internationalist forces. So they both hate the nation state, and they both hate America. So they both want to destroy America. That's the most immediate reason for the unity. But also, yes, they both are internationalists. Now, see, think about it. If you were a radical leftist, every time there's been a radical leftist regime, they went to war against religion. And every time they lost. The Soviet Union tried to stamp out religion, and ultimately they gave up, and instead they just made a KGB agent the Patriarch of Moscow. And the French Revolution tried to stamp out religion, and they had to just completely retreat and surrender and give up. It's a very deep impulse in the human heart to have a religion. And so now I think the left has a new idea, and that is, instead of trying to stamp out religion, it will favor the religion that favors its own ends. And so you have a religion that, instead of, like Christianity, calling for the individual dignity of each person as made in the image of God, that's no good for the left, because the left is collectivist and wants to stamp out individuality. So they hate Christianity, but Islam is very collectivist, and you only have any meaning as part of this global Islamic community, the Ummah. So that supersedes all nationalities. These are people that hate the nation state. That's why we have an open border. And so they love Islam. They figure we'll foster Islam in the West, and that will take care of people's religious impulse, but it will still allow us to destroy nation states and create our socialist internationalist order. Also, Islam lends itself to authoritarianism. The left is authoritarian, wants to stamp out dissent. We see this with the criminalization of dissent in the United States, the persecution of Trump, the criminalization of other things people don't know, but the Biden FBI has gone up against parents protesting at school board meetings, and Catholics protesting against abortion, and they classify them as terrorists. And it's the same thing. What they want to do is stamp out all dissent, and only their perspective will be allowed. And so we saw that also with the COVID dissidents and the Biden administration working with the tech giants to silence them, and their attempt to create a disinformation governance board that would stamp out alleged disinformation, which was really, of course, just material that they didn't want out because it didn't favor their political point of view. And so this is a deeply authoritarian regime we've got in the United States right now. And so they also love Islam, because in Islam you have Muhammad saying, obey your ruler, even if he's an Ethiopian with a head like a raisin. And people often quote that to say, see, look, Muhammad was this terrible racist. And that's true, but that's not even, I think, the most important aspect of that passage, because it's not just saying that, the Ethiopian has a head like a raisin, and so we can ridicule him, but also saying, obey your ruler, even if he's the most outlandish person I can think of. Even if he is this crazy guy with a head like a raisin, you obey him. And this is music to the left's ears, because they want you to obey the ruler no matter what, to love Big Brother. And so if you have to obey your ruler, even if he's this outlandish figure, as far as Muhammad is concerned, the left loves that. So authoritarianism and internationalism, I think, have made the marriage between the left and Islam. And this is why it's surviving even in this time of tension when the whole jihad against Israel, as a matter of fact, has made the far left wing of the Democrat Party enraged with the Biden regime, because the Biden regime still pretends to be on the side of Israel, even though it's just pretending, and meanwhile shipping $10 billion to Iran. Nonetheless, even that's not good enough for the jihadis, the jihad wing like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. They wanted to abandon Israel altogether, to be denouncing it and endorsing Hamas.
Well, I'll tell you what, I want to make a couple observations. First of all, the Western man, and especially the American man and woman, they always thought the authoritarianism was going to come from some big, bad, right-wing bad guy. They didn't understand. You just mentioned
Orange Man.
Yeah, they just mentioned.
Yeah, they still think that.
They still think that. They don't understand that what Orwell was describing was not necessarily, by any means, something that was confined to the right. I remember the book Liberal Fascism.
By the liberal fascist Jonah Goldberg.
Yeah. Well, look, the Western man can't conceive of any of this, and I want to ask you about the slaughter in Africa of Christians, Robert, and this is at the hands of radical Islamists. There are also girls being sold into slavery on the back of flatbed trucks. Robert, no one cares.
No.
Our media is nonstop election coverage for 2 years presidential, then 2 years midterms. It is a nonstop. We used to have like Welcome Back Kotter to entertain us, or the Brady Bunch for that matter, to entertain us. Now we've got the election constantly. And there are people, so Robert, very quickly, there are people being slaughtered, Christians being slaughtered. This is not all about the Jews. Christians being slaughtered in Africa, right? And I see nothing about
no college protests.
Nothing.
Yeah. Well, we have to understand the media is a propaganda arm for the left. There is no way in which the New York Times or CNN or the Washington Post or all the rest of them are actual news sources at this point. All they are is leftist propaganda organs. And the propaganda proceeds according to templates. They have some templates for the stories, and the templates are always used. If a story doesn't fit the template, the story doesn't exist. And so you have Israel kills X number of Palestinians. And so even when Hezbollah sends a rocket into Israel, like the other day, and kills 12 children, you have the reporting say Israel strikes back at Hezbollah and kills, 10 million children or whatever. And they don't focus on the strike against Israel. You have in Africa, the paradigm is always that Muslims are the victims.
Yes.
And the Christians are the white Western oppressors. And the Muslims are not just victims, but brown victims. So if a story fits Muslims are brown victims and Christians are white oppressors, then you'll hear about it. But if you have a story like the brown Muslims actually killing equally brown Christians,
it doesn't make it fair.
Doesn't fit the narrative, doesn't fit the template.
It
does not exist.
Susan, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking along those lines. We need restitution. Slavery's bad. Slavery's terrible. Well, white people didn't capture the slaves. That was mostly Islamic. The prophet did call them raisin heads. And there were a great many white slaves brought into the slave market as well. And Islam continues to have slavery. So this double standard of facts and the ignoring of facts that don't fit the narrative, it's really got to stop. And there are people out there who are willing to learn the truth.
Queers for Palestine. Queers for Palestine, Susan. Queers for Palestine. Queers for Palestine.
Let them have a library story hour, drag queen story hour in Palestine. I'm sure that would go over real good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Robert, I want to turn to this in our last few minutes. You have tremendous courage. And you know, I've lived long enough to know you're not going to meet that many people who are going to put their neck on the line, like literally put their neck on the line. And I'm wondering if you can reflect on your treatment by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and also if you've been, you know, if you've lived under personal threat to your safety.
Well, sure. I get death threats all the time. I barely pay attention to them now. I've gotten so many. There have been 2 attempts to kill me. They missed, both of them. But in 2015, Pamela Geller and I put on a Muhammad art exhibit and cartoon contest in Garland, Texas. And it was a very successful event, and we were just wrapping it up. It had just actually finished. And a couple of jihadis came all the way from Phoenix to Garland, Texas, 8-hour drive, to kill us all. And they drew their guns in the parking lot, which was not very wise, I guess. But anyway, our security team then shot them. They shot one of our guys, but he survived. But
you had to have a private security team.
Yeah, we spent quite a lot of money on private security. And they shot one of our guys, and then they themselves were killed, so they were not successful. Then in 2017, I spoke in Iceland, wildly successful event, actually, because there were 500 people there. And that's really remarkable for Iceland because they only have 300,000 people. So that would be like speaking to an audience of 500,000 people in the United States. It was huge, and it was a very big event, lots of publicity. And I didn't really think of that because we went out after for dinner, and a guy slipped some stuff into my drink. I went to the emergency room. I was very sick for quite a while, but anyway, I survived. So there was that. And then in terms of the Southern Poverty Law Center, what they try to do, of course, is kill your reputation. They've been wildly successful at it. I have to tip my hat to them in that regard. But I would ask anybody who reads How Evil I Am on the Southern Poverty Law Center website, look at the quotes they have from me and ask yourself, are these really false? Much less evil. You know, they put all these quotes from me out there to show that I'm this terrible, hateful person. But when I read them anyway, I think, well, that's just true. Might be unpleasant, but it's not hateful or racist or anything. But anyway, what they want to do is they have assassinated the character of a lot of people, of course, not just me. And the idea is to make it easy for leftists so that, you know, if they're holding an event, they know who to avoid, they know who to not have, they know who to criticize, and they have it all there. The right is not nearly as good at this kind of thing. And so, you know, even recently there was some big conservative conference, and they had this moderate Muslim lying Islamic apologist there, Ed Hussein, speaking, and he was a featured speaker. And I think, you know, the guy he does nothing but lie, but these people don't know. And they probably even believe the Southern Poverty Law Center that they wouldn't dare ask somebody like me because I'm racist and Islamophobic. But it's all just designed to get it so that people are scared to look into what you have to say. And what they don't ever show is that what I say is not true or accurate.
Yes, and
right. It's what I call fart physics. You point out a stink, and you get accused of being the one that created the stink.
Oh, that's very true. Yeah, years ago, almost 20 years ago now, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation had this thing called the Islamophobia Observatory. And they had me in there. They put out a thing every month, and they had me in there every time. And more often than not, it was some quote from Jihad Watch where they said, Spencer says that jihad is this, or Islam says that. And I was actually quoting some Muslim cleric, but that was okay. They didn't mind it when the Muslim cleric said it. But when I quoted him, it would become Islamophobic.
Yeah. And of course, Islamophobia is a word that was invented by fascists and used by cowards to manipulate morons.
Yeah, to scare people into thinking, oh, it's racist and Islamophobic to resist jihad violence or Sharia oppression of women.
Yeah. You know, if I'm not willing to be raped, I'm Islamophobic.
Yeah.
Well, folks, so here we are, almost 23 years after 9/11. And none of this is sinking in with the general population. It's just not, it's not getting in. But now, I don't want to be too negative. A lot of people appreciate what Robert has put out there, what Frank Gaffney has done, what Steve Emerson has done, what David Horowitz has done, and on, Pamela Geller. But boy, you turn on that television and you're not really getting the truth about the Muslim Brotherhood. You're not really getting the truth about what Islam wants. You're not really getting the truth about the absurdity of the leave it up there. Leave it up there. You're not getting the truth about the absurdity about Queers for Palestine. And I hope you will all go and buy the book Muhammad, A Critical Biography, and many others, folks, many others by Robert Spencer, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam. Go to Amazon, click on everything, pull out your credit card, the history of G. Just keep going. It just pull out your credit card, and we're going to do. Go ahead, come on, let's go. It's got a stack of 28 of them. Let's go. We got to get through this. So
they're up there, though. I'd have to
what can I tell you, folks? They say what they want. Take them seriously as they burn children and behead people and rape women and drag their dead bodies through the streets. You might want to take them seriously. Or maybe one day they'll fly a couple planes into the World Trade Center. Oh, look, they already did. Susan, any final thoughts for Robert?
Just, wake up. And also there are very subtle things in which Islamic supremacy rears its head. Things like in Canada, KFC is all halal.
Oh, that's nice.
That may seem like a small thing, but they're saying they're doing it to be inclusive.
Right.
Well, it's exclusive. And they've eliminated bacon from the menu. And when your local school stops serving Jell-O at lunch, this is a warning sign.
And also, I'll give you one more warning sign, Robert. I don't know if Susan and I live in LA, but we had the lovely experience of watching people join hands and stop Jews from going to their synagogue. And the cops stand there and do nothing. Why? Because no one wants to be thought of as Islamophobic. Robert, any final thoughts before we let you go?
Well, that's really the death of the whole West.
Yes.
The rape gangs in Britain, the Muslim rape gangs, proceeding according to the philosophy that I was outlining earlier, the belief that you can take infidel women and make them sex slaves. Thousands of British girls were brutalized and raped and forced into prostitution because of that by thousands of Muslim men. And many of them have been prosecuted now, but many of them have not. And the British authorities knew about it for years and let it go on and did nothing because they were afraid of being called Islamophobic. And that's going to be the death of Britain and the entire West.
And the fathers of these girls, in their attempts to save them and get them back, they were the ones incarcerated.
Yep.
Robert Spencer, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining Susan Olson and myself. And we look forward to running into you again in person real soon. And God bless.
Yes.
You too.
I love you.
Love you.
Mwah.